You need to be more humble. That's what my boss said right in front of the entire department. And all I had done was ask about a raise after 3 years of working like a machine. I didn't argue, I didn't cry, I didn't take it back. I just nodded and walked out of the meeting room like nothing happened. Because I knew something. He didn't. The walnut desk he always bragged about, the one he'd run his hand over before every client meeting, was on the building's liquidation list. And in just a few weeks, I'd be the one signing the ownership papers. Not to sit at it, but to place it in my new office, where I am, the one in charge. My name is Naomi Blake. I live in Dallas, Texas, and for 3 years, I gave everything to that job. Late nights, early mornings, deadlines that crushed my lungs. I managed projects that should have had a whole team. But somehow, I was always the one picking up the slack, always the one staying behind after meetings to fix what others forgot. No complaints, no attitude, just results. I thought that would be enough. I thought someone like Thomas Reddick, my manager, would see that. He was sharp. I'll give him that. Old school. Always wearing expensive suits and a tie so tight it looked like it was strangling his soul. But to the outside world, he was polished, professional, the kind of man who mentors young talent. Until you worked under him. Then you learned quickly Thomas didn't mentor. He measured, he judged, he picked favorites, and I wasn't one of them. Still, I kept hoping, kept telling myself this quarter it'll be different. This time, they'll notice. So I put together a full performance report, tied in every metric, every milestone, graphs, forecasts, future growth. I handed it in before my annual review, on time, professional, clear, and I asked, calmly with rehearsed poise, if we could discuss a salary adjustment. Thomas didn't even glance at the papers. He leaned back, crossed his arms, and smiled. Not a kind smile, a condescending one, like I had just told him a joke. "Naomi," he said, voice syrupy and slow, "you're good, really. But you need to be more humble." Then he tapped his pen. Once, twice. Raises are for people who show they can work with the system, not against it. I felt my hands go cold, because I knew exactly what that meant. I wasn't a brown-noser. I didn't flirt. I didn't fake enthusiasm. I did the job, and I did it better than anyone else. But in his eyes, that made me threatening. He ended the meeting early, said he had a real client call, and left me sitting there, staring at the paper I poured my exhaustion into. I didn't cry, didn't scream, didn't slam the door. I walked out of that room like nothing had happened, smiled at reception, waved to Sarah from finance, and then I sat in my car parked under the blistering Texas sun and just breathed. 5 seconds. In. Out. Because I realized something. He wasn't going to reward me. Not now. Not ever. And if I stayed there, waiting for a man like him to hand me my worth, I'd rot. So I didn't fight him. I watched. I listened. I started gathering information. Not about him, but about the building, about the contracts, the property. And that's when I found it. A tiny note. A lease clause. The office suite was part of a larger co-working complex, one that was being liquidated. Quietly. Without alert. And in that moment, I knew exactly how I was going to respond to Thomas Reddick. Not with tears, not with emails, but with a purchase receipt. Signed in ink, stamped in silence. This story doesn't start with revenge. It starts with a desk, one he thought was his forever, and one I was about to make mine. At first, I thought it was just me. Maybe I was being sensitive. Maybe Thomas treated everyone with that same cold, careful dismissal. But the more I observed, the more I noticed the pattern. It wasn't that he hated competence. He just didn't know what to do with a woman who wasn't afraid of him. If you were quiet, soft-spoken, eager to please, you were safe. But if you challenged a timeline, if you asked too many questions, pushed back, even politely, he saw it as defiance. He didn't say it, of course. Thomas was too smart for that. He just erased you in small, sharp ways. Like the way he rerouted a major pitch presentation to Greg, who'd only been there 6 months while I watched the calendar update in real time. Or the way he smiled when a client praised me, and then said, "Yes, our team really stepped up." Like I hadn't just led the entire operation solo. He used team like a scalpel to cut me out. I started keeping a journal, not just for myself, but for clarity. Every little slight, every backhanded compliment, every time my name was left out of emails I clearly should have been CC'd on. I wrote it all down. Because some days, gaslighting is so quiet. You need proof you're not losing your mind. He once told me I had a high opinion of myself. It was after I corrected a data point in his report. I did it politely, in private, with sources cited, and still he looked at me like I had betrayed him. You need to be careful with that tone, Naomi. People might take it the wrong way. That tone was competence. It scared him. One time, during a team lunch, he introduced everyone by title. This is our lead designer, our sales manager, our engineer, and when it came to me, he said, "And this is Naomi. She does a little bit of everything." Everyone laughed politely. I smiled too, but I felt that flush of heat rising from the base of my neck, that silent scream inside my ribs. I wasn't a joke, I was the damn engine. But to him, I was a woman who'd forgotten her place. After a while, others began to notice too. Sarah from finance pulled me aside one morning and whispered, "He talks about you in budget meetings, says you're ambitious in ways that can't be taught." She didn't say it as a compliment. It clicked then, that wasn't praise, that was a warning. And so, I shifted. No more emotional labor, no more trying to prove anything. I became quiet, not small, not invisible, just silent. I stopped volunteering extra hours, stopped explaining my choices, stopped giving solutions before people asked for them. Instead, I started planning. I learned about the real estate trust that owned our building. Found a buried notice in the city records, a lien, followed by a silent auction filing. The company that held the lease, they were months behind. Thomas had no clue. And then something wild happened. A recruiter messaged me out of the blue. A woman named Mia, building a tech consultancy with seed backing. She said she'd been following my work, that she admired my clarity, my structure. We met for coffee, and in 20 minutes, I felt more seen than I had in 3 years under Thomas. She didn't just want me on her team. She offered me co-founder equity. It wasn't about the title. It was about autonomy, about power I didn't have to beg for. I said yes, quietly, without telling anyone at my current job. I stayed on, pretended nothing had changed. But inside me, a switch flipped. I wasn't scared of him anymore. I was ahead of him. Then came the auction. It was small, private, just a list of office furniture being sold off from the suite, chairs, tables, desks, and there it was. 1-1 custom walnut executive desk with built-in drawer safe, leather inlay. Minimum bid $450. I paid $200, no hesitation. I didn't buy it to spite him. I bought it because that desk was a symbol of every time I was told to be smaller, of every time I was dismissed, ignored, diminished, and because I was going to place that desk in my new office. And every morning, I was going to set my coffee on it with my name on the door. Thomas Reddick didn't destroy me. He revealed me. And the pattern of his disrespect, it became the blueprint for my exit. The quiet kind. The kind where you don't say goodbye. You just level up. But let me tell you what really broke the spell. It wasn't the disrespect. I could survive that. It wasn't even the erasure. I'd grown used to being the ghost who held the ceiling up. It was the meeting about the future of the company. Thomas called it on a Monday morning, said he wanted to streamline decision-making code for cutting heads. He asked everyone to go around the room and name their strengths. What an absurd thing to do in a room full of adults who had proven themselves for years. When it got to me, I simply said, "Execution. I get things done." Thomas smirked, then repeated it out loud like a punchline. "Naomi gets things done." He chuckled, like that was funny. People laughed, not because it was hilarious, but because when a man in a position of power laughs, you laugh too. Or else. But one person didn't laugh. His name was Jordan, one of the newer analysts. Young, observant, kind. He looked at me across the table and just shook his head. Subtle, silent. But I saw it. And in that moment, I knew. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't dramatic. I was just being worn down, day after day, under the weight of 1,000 small humiliations. I drove home that night and sat in my kitchen for 2 hours. Didn't turn on the lights, didn't even change out of my work shoes. I just sat there, in the dark, thinking about how I'd given years of my life to a place that couldn't even say my name with respect. And then I thought about that desk, how Thomas used to run his hand across it before every meeting, like it gave him power, how he once told me, "A man's desk says everything about him." Well, Thomas, mine was coming, and when it arrived, it wouldn't sit in a corner office granted by someone else. It would sit in a room I helped build, brick by brick, line by line, equity by equity. I was done waiting for a raise. I was done asking for permission. And most of all, I was done shrinking. By the time I sent in my notice, the ink on the bill of sale was already dry. My new company was launching that week. And in the back of the U-Haul van, wrapped in a moving blanket, was a walnut desk with a history and a future that belonged finally to me. You know what no one talks about, the silence between betrayal and revenge, that space where you're not screaming, not crying, just calculating. That's where I lived, for weeks, not as a victim, but as a woman sharpening her own knife in the dark. After I bought the desk, I didn't brag, didn't gloat, didn't even tell anyone at work. I just started planning, every detail, every move, quiet, clean, untraceable. I had a spreadsheet titled Vacation Budget, but it wasn't for a vacation. It was a detailed breakdown of what I needed to launch a new venture, the consulting firm Mia and I had dreamed up over coffee. I tracked everything: domain registration, legal fees, brand identity design, CRM software, talent sourcing, client prospecting. Every dollar counted. At work, I was still Naomi the dependable, still showing up, still replying to emails, still attending those soul-sucking stand-ups where Thomas droned on about optimization culture. But inside, I had already left. Mia and I met 3 times a week, late nights at her condo, early mornings in cafes before work. She was brilliant operations wizard with connections I never knew existed. We built it lean, we built it fast. By the time March rolled around, we had an LLC, a starter website, and 2 trial clients on retainer. We called it Core Signal Consulting. Sharp name, clean visual. We meant business. But I still needed one last piece, a space. We didn't want a big flashy office, not yet, but we needed a place to land clients, to hold meetings, to look credible. That's when I remembered an old law firm suite on the 5th floor of the same building where my current job resided. It had been vacant for months, quietly listed, dusty, but with huge windows and a private conference room. I called the leasing office, and because the building was bleeding tenants, they offered us a short-term lease, half price. We signed it that week. And you know what I brought in first, the desk. I stood there, watching the movers unwrap it. It looked smaller somehow, out of context, less intimidating, but it was still beautiful, still heavy with meaning, still mine. We furnished the rest slowly: a rug, a coffee bar, some plants, a coat rack. Everything had intention. Everything whispered power. But make it silent. I wrote the launch announcement on a Tuesday morning, sitting behind that very desk. The sun had just hit the east-facing window. Golden, sharp. And with every keystroke, I felt something return to me. My voice. My name. My damn worth. We didn't announce to the world yet. Just our contacts, people we trusted. And slowly, like drops filling a glass, clients began to respond. A tech startup in Austin, a logistics firm in Chicago, a fashion house pivoting into digital. It was happening. We were happening. Then came the invitation. Thomas's company, the one I'd left in spirit long ago, put out a request for proposal. They needed outside help restructuring their workflow. I read the scope and almost laughed. It was my old system, my process, my roadmap, the one he'd ignored, watered down, claimed didn't scale. Now they wanted to outsource it. Perfect. I submitted the proposal under Mia's name. Let him think it came from a stranger. We got shortlisted within 2 days, and then scheduled for an in-person pitch. I didn't tell Mia everything, not yet. I just asked her to trust me and let me take the lead on this meeting. She agreed. No questions. That Friday, I walked back into the building, but not as an employee. I wore a deep navy pantsuit, minimal makeup, no jewelry except for a small lapel pin with our company logo. I looked like what I had become, the version of myself Thomas never saw coming. When he stepped into our new suite, he paused. His eyes scanned the space, the rug, the plants, the glass-top conference table, and then they landed on the desk. His desk. He froze for a full 2 seconds, then smiled. Thinly, "That looks familiar," he said. I didn't flinch, didn't blink. I gestured to the chair across from me. "Please, have a seat." The meeting lasted 45 minutes. I walked him through our entire framework, with data, with precision. He asked questions. I answered them all. And not once did I mention our past. Because I didn't need to. He was sitting in it. At the end, he said, "You've built something impressive." I smiled. "Thank you. We only work with clients who value execution." He didn't wince, but his silence was all the confirmation I needed. After he left, Mia turned to me slowly. "Okay," she said. "Now you have to tell me the story behind that desk." And I did. Not all of it, but enough. Enough for her to laugh. Enough for her to say, "Damn, that's poetic." She was right. It was more than poetic. It was justice, served cold, polished with lemon oil, and placed squarely beneath my nameplate. That night, I stayed late in the office, not because I had to, but because I wanted to sit at that desk and remember everything it took to get there. I touched the grooves in the wood, ran my hand across the smooth leather inlay. It wasn't just furniture. It was proof. Proof that I had built something permanent out of the disrespect they tried to bury me under. I opened the drawer, the one with the built-in safe. It was empty now. But in my head, I filled it with all the moments I had swallowed, every ignored email, every stolen idea, every performance review that ended with "not yet." They didn't break me. They trained me. On the wall behind me, we'd hung our mission statement. It wasn't filled with buzzwords or empty promises. Just one line. "We reward brilliance, not obedience." I stared at it for a long time. Because it wasn't just a policy. It was a vow. The next week, we won the contract. Thomas's company officially became our client. He emailed Mia to confirm the onboarding call, and CC'd me. The subject line simply said, "Next steps." I smiled. Because I already knew the steps. I had walked them barefoot for 3 years. Now I was paving them, in heels. In the weeks that followed, we onboarded 3 new clients, hired our first part-time assistant, and started interviewing interns from local universities. Core Signal wasn't just surviving, it was growing. And every time someone complimented our professionalism, our process, our Polish, I thought of that desk. How it used to sit beneath a man who didn't believe in me, and now stood beneath a woman who believed in herself. I never blocked Thomas's number, but I never reached out again either. There was nothing left to say, no revenge email, no mic drop moment, just silence and success. You'd think the moment would be loud, that there would be shouting, tension, maybe even an argument. But when power shifts quietly, when it reverses without announcement, it doesn't need volume. It only needs presence. That was the air in the room the day Thomas came back into my life. But this time, on my terms, and into my office. The one with the glass door, clean logo, fresh cut flowers, and his old desk. He arrived 5 minutes early. Of course he did. Thomas was the type who believed being early was a power move. I saw him through the frosted partition, adjusting his tie, checking his reflection in the dark screen of his phone, still wearing the same smugness like an accessory. But when Mia opened the door and ushered him in, something shifted. His eyes scanned the room and landed right where I knew they would. On the desk, polished walnut, leather inlay, still flawless, still his, in memory, but mine now, in every legal, poetic way. He didn't speak right away, didn't ask, didn't point, just stared one beat too long before offering a thin smile. "That's a nice piece," he said. "Looks familiar." I looked up, dead in the eye. You left it behind." He chuckled, awkward, trying to keep it light. But the room knew. Mia knew. I knew. He'd lost control of the moment before he even sat down. I gestured to the seat across from me. He lowered himself slowly, glancing at the materials we'd laid out. Mia opened with small talk, client metrics, growth percentages. I let her lead, let him relax, let the rhythm pull him in. Then I spoke, not with venom, not with fire, just facts, measured, precise, cold like marble. "The inefficiencies in your internal task flow," I began, "stem from redundancy in leadership chains. Too many decisions bottleneck at your mid-tier level. We propose a vertical slice model direct line execution with embedded oversight." Thomas blinked. He wasn't used to hearing language he couldn't reframe. He scribbled a note, nodded. "You always had a gift for process. Always. Not have. Past tense, as if that version of me had ended when I left. But I had only evolved." I kept going, walked him through a timeline, a case study, client testimonials, all people who once doubted me too. But now they quoted my strategies like scripture. At one point, he interrupted Mia to ask how we sourced our vendor team so fast. I leaned in. We prioritize execution over politics, and let that hang in the air. He didn't reply, didn't need to. His silence said everything. We wrapped after 52 minutes. He stood, thanked us, shook Mia's hand, then turned to me. And this time, there was no smile. Just eyes trying to read a chapter he'd never gotten to finish. "You've really built something here. Naomi," it wasn't praise, it was disbelief. Like he couldn't reconcile the woman in front of him with the version he'd crafted in his mind. The version who stayed in her lane, who waited, who asked for raises instead of building empires. I met his gaze. "You didn't see me before, but you're sitting at my desk now." He opened his mouth, closed it, then simply nodded and walked out, each step echoing softer than the last. Mia turned to me, eyes wide. Damn, just that one word, but it carried centuries of women reclaiming rooms they were never supposed to enter. We didn't celebrate that day. We worked, signed 2 new clients, filed onboarding paperwork, and moved forward. But later that night, I stayed behind. I turned off the overhead lights, lit the tiny candle on the windowsill, and ran my fingers along the desk edge again, like a scar that had finally healed smooth. I thought about every time he made me question my worth, every time I watered myself down to be digestible, every time I chose silence because I thought speaking up would cost me more than I could afford. And now here I was, not loud, not vengeful, just whole. The showdown didn't need fire, it needed grace. And grace, I've learned, is the most powerful form of revenge. He walked in expecting to win a contract. He left realizing he'd lost something bigger: control, narrative, power. And he didn't even get to yell about it. That was mine, all mine. The next morning, I found a sticky note on my desk. It wasn't from Mia. It was from Jordan, the young analyst who once shook his head at that team meeting. When Thomas made a joke at my expense, it said, "Saw him leave, saw your face. Just wanted to say, I took notes, and I'm proud of you." And I'm proud. That note meant more than any applause, because that's what power really is. Not dominance, not revenge porn. It's making space, so others can see a way through. A week later, I was invited to speak at a women's leadership panel at SMU. I almost said no. But then I remembered all the times I sat in rooms where no one looked like me, where no one told the truth. So I showed up, and I told my story. Not the polished version, but the messy one. The tired mornings, the gaslighting, the quiet tears in the car, and the moment I decided to stop waiting to be chosen. Afterward, a woman in her 40s came up to me, tears in her eyes. She whispered, "I've been sitting at someone else's desk for 10 years. Thank you for reminding me I can leave." That's when I knew this wasn't just about Thomas. It never was. It was about every woman who's ever been told she's too much, too smart, too opinionated, or not enough. It was about reclaiming the narrative, on our terms. I walked back to the office that night, alone, unlocked the door, turned on the soft lights, sat behind my desk and opened my laptop. And I began to write, not another proposal, not a client memo, but a letter, to myself, to the woman I used to be. "Dear Naomi," it began, "you didn't lose anything. You gained clarity, courage, and a room of your own." I folded it, tucked it in the drawer with the safe, because this time I wasn't locking away pain, I was storing power. A few days later, I got an email from Thomas. No subject line, just a single sentence. "You were right, I should have listened." I didn't reply, not because I was angry, but because closure doesn't always need a response. Sometimes, silence is the most elegant punctuation. I leaned back in my chair, watched the city lights flicker through the glass. Dallas was buzzing, unaware of the quiet triumph echoing in one corner office. The world kept spinning. But I had found stillness, and in that stillness, power. There's always a final line, a sentence that stays long after the room empties. For years, I thought mine would come in a confrontation, a slammed door, a shouted truth, a moment that burned everything behind me. But instead, my final line came in a whisper, spoken not out loud, but inside me. A realization that didn't demand applause, only stillness. Because real power isn't loud. It doesn't need to prove anything. It just arrives. And when it does, it changes everything. 3 weeks after the meeting with Thomas, we signed a major account, a national logistics firm with offices across the country. Our firm core signal was now playing in a league that used to seem like fiction, and I was no longer managing projects. I was designing visions, and people were listening. One afternoon, I received a LinkedIn request from someone I hadn't seen in years. Her name was Dana. She'd been in my old department, same pay scale, different treatment. She was one of the ones Thomas favored, polished, always agreeable. I never blamed her. She did what she had to do to survive. Her message said, "I saw the Forbes feature. You have no idea how many of us you're inspiring. I wish I had left when you did." I read it twice, then closed the app, because the win wasn't in being seen. The win was that I no longer needed to be. People started asking me to mentor, to speak, to consult, and I said yes, but selectively, not to pad my resume, but to protect my peace. Because once you've clawed your way out of silence, you don't hand that freedom away easily. At a networking event in downtown Dallas, A young woman approached me. She was wearing a name badge, holding a notebook, eyes full of nervous hope. "I'm sorry to bother you," she said, "but I read about how you started Signal, and how did you know it was time to leave?" I smiled, paused, and then said I didn't. I just knew I couldn't stay. She nodded, and I saw it, that flicker of recognition, the beginning of someone else's final line. Back at the office, things were evolving. We hired a third partner, expanded into a second city, and in the middle of all the growth, I made a decision. I was going to give the desk away. Not sell it, not store it, but pass it on to another woman building something, a woman who didn't need furniture, she needed a symbol. Her name was Alexis, a founder, first-generation college grad, running a literacy startup for underserved kids. I met her through a mutual friend. When she came to our office and saw the desk, she gasped, ran her fingers over the grain, and said, "This feels like something built to last." I smiled. It is. We had it delivered to her new space the next day. No invoice, no headlines, just a note, folded inside the top drawer. "Let them underestimate you. Let this desk remind you what they don't see coming." I returned to my now half-empty office, sat on the floor, looked around, and felt something rare. Closure. Not the dramatic kind. The quiet kind that settles into your bones. Later that evening, Mia came in, saw the space, tilted her head. "You sure?" she asked. I nodded. It served its purpose. Now it's time for it to serve someone else. We sat there, both barefoot, sipping tea out of mismatched mugs. The city lights blinked outside. And inside, a new chapter was unfolding. No furniture required. A few months passed. I was invited to deliver the keynote at a leadership summit. The topic, Silent Power, How to Build Without Permission. I stood on that stage and spoke not of revenge, but of rebirth, of knowing when to walk away and when to build your own damn table. And before I stepped off stage, I left them with this: if they block your raise, don't raise your voice, raise your vision. And if you must buy their desk, but only so you can pass it on. That was my final line. Not a jab, not a clapback, just the truth, delivered in full voice, with the clarity that only comes from living every syllable. So if you're listening to this in a car, in your kitchen, late at night wondering if they'll ever see your worth, let me say this: you don't need their permission, you only need your decision. Because once you choose yourself fully, unapologetically, no one can unchoose you. Not a boss, not a title, not a system built to keep you small. I am Naomi Blake, and I bought his desk, but more importantly, I built my own floor beneath it. Weeks after the summit, I received a package. Inside was a small wooden plaque. On it, engraved in bold serif font, were the words, "She didn't ask, she built." It was unsigned. No note, no return address. Just that phrase. I placed it on my new shelf, the one we had crafted from reclaimed wood. It stood next to a photo of our launch day, and a candle that never seemed to burn out. Legacy is strange. You think it's the things you leave behind: the desk, the office, the company name, but it's not. Legacy is what people say about you when you're not in the room. It's the quiet courage you pass on by simply refusing to shrink. Alexis emailed a few weeks later. She'd signed her first school district contract. She wrote, "I signed it with my elbows on your desk. I swear it gave me spine." I laughed and cried at the same time, because that's what real impact feels like. It bends you open without needing noise. At Signal, we began a quiet tradition. Every time a woman on our team hit a milestone, a new certification, a client win, a personal victory, we didn't throw a party. We wrote letters, one sentence, handwritten, placed in a locked box labeled, "For the days you forget." Because forgetting is human. But remembering who you are, who you've always been, that's power. Someday, I'll write a book. Not for fame, not for profit, but for the girl I used to be, the one who waited for permission, who rehearsed bravery in bathroom mirrors, who walked home with tired feet and a full heart, hoping someone would finally say, "You matter. I'll write it for her, and for you. Whoever you are, wherever you're sitting, whether on a borrowed chair or your own damn throne, know this: you can leave. You can build. You can return, not to be accepted, but to take the lead. And when they ask you how you did it, smile. Say nothing, and let the silence speak for itself."